Hey everyone, welcome to episode 146 of WP Roundtable. My name is Kyle. I've got a very special guest with me today. I am glad to be joined by Andrea Middleton. How are you doing this evening, Andrea?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for asking.
I've been really excited about getting to chat with you. You've been on my short list to get on the show for quite a long time. And here we are at last. Very much looking forward to our conversation. I think there's no question that I'm going to not even come close to getting through all the questions that I would like to ask in the time that we have. I'll barely scratch the surface, but we'll do our best nonetheless. So thank you for taking your time out of the middle of your workday to join me on the show.
Happy to be here.
All right, Andrea Middleton works for a little company called Automattic, which might be the most, probably is at this point, the most frequently appearing company represented on this show in terms of our guests. Yeah, I think Automattic would be up there, probably at around 4 or 5 or 6 or so. Anyway, let's cover our quick picks of the week real fast, if you don't mind. This is just the part of the show where everyone shares something relevant or interesting that they've encountered lately. And as it happens, I've observed a few things that interested me in the past couple of weeks, but one in particular that I'm following as closely as I have time for, and I think a lot of us are, is this old Gutenberg project. Maybe you've heard of it. Basically every other WordPress news article now seems to relate to our expressions of our feelings about the Gutenberg project or requests for input. And just the other day, on August 11th in the afternoon, Tammy Lister posted a revised suggested roadmap for Gutenberg and customization. And this kind of is just an update on the status of the project and outlines some adjustments for and specifications for the upcoming roadmap for this project. And there are quite a few comments on the thread. This is definitely a project that a lot of people are voicing their opinions on. It's sparking some interesting discussion. So I recommend that anybody involved in the project take a look at that, just get caught up on the discussion and definitely contribute. This is the kind of project where a lot of voices really need to be heard that are constructive, of course. So over on make.wordpress.org/core, you'll find that recent post by Tammy. Andrea, do you have anything you'd like to share with us today?
I have something that got my attention a couple of weeks ago that I'm still really mulling over, and it is an article on brainpickings.org about the magic of real conversation. It's an Ursula K. Le Guin, or an article about Ursula K. Le Guin, who's a native Portlander, and I am too, and a science fiction writer that I very much look up to. And it has some interesting reflections on what happens different when we converse with people in person versus communicating through other methods. And as someone who's overseeing a really huge in-person events program, I am really interested in kind of digging into that special sauce that comes from, what about a live in-person event and the interactions you have there is so much more powerful than conversing with someone on Twitter or even in video chat or something like that. And, what makes our events program so sticky and so important for the overall project. I will mention that I think a project like Gutenberg is a really good example of one of the reasons that our event program is so important, because I think it's so much easier for us to be our best selves and have really constructive conversations when we are face-to-face with people. And that's one of the things that makes me really passionate about the global community team, is how we kind of help bring out the humanity in the project together. So that's what I'm interested in right now and thinking about a lot. It's called Telling is Listening, Ursula K. Le Guin on the Magic of Real Human Conversation.
Wow, that sounds like a really great read. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I really enjoyed it, and it gave me a lot to think about, so I recommend it.
Yeah, well, good. I'll encourage everybody to check that out, and I look forward to reading it myself. All right, Andrea. So, in case there's anybody tuning in who doesn't know already, or watching this in the future who doesn't maybe know your entire history, let's
Oh my
start
gosh,
diving into
I'm
that.
sure there are like a million people who know nothing about me.
There's a chance. There's a chance. But a lot of us know the classic story. But for those of us who don't, let's talk a little bit about how Andrea Middleton got to be where she is right now. And if you don't mind, we could start. I'd like to add a point earlier in your life before you had a career relating to the web, before WordPress was a part of your life, before you really had a career to speak of, but you had ambition and you had a vision for your life. You said, I'm Andrea Middleton. I'm going to go do this with my life. What was it that you wanted to do, and how did you get yourself on that path?
Oh, I didn't do that. Um, that's not anything like what I did. When I was very, very young, I wanted to be either a librarian or a poet. Both of
Mm,
those are famously low paid positions, but they put me in contact with books and words, which are the two
mm,
things that I might love most in the world, other than my family. And I then wanted to be an English teacher, and I did become an English teacher. I taught English in abroad in Mexico for about 4 or 5 years. And but yeah, my road to the technology sector was super duper roundabout and accidental. I
mhm,
worked in a lot of other jobs before I came here, a lot of which kind of connected to the stuff that I do now. But if you had asked me even 7 years ago, hey, are you going to be involved in a large open source software project in your future? I'd be like, I don't even know what that is. So what?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm curious about how maybe the turn of events for you that preceded your role at
Oh.
Automattic, and did you do anything relating to our space
Uh-huh.
before you began organizing community events?
I did. I started working with WordPress in like 2006. I had kind of just left a job doing working for a large, or actually a very small beverage distributor in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So I sold wine for a living, and spirits and beer and various and sundry other things, but mostly
Yeah.
wine was my passion. And so I moved away from the VI and was working in a different sector, and but still really loved wine. And there was this thing called blogging, and so I was like, well, I want to write a wine blog. And my best friend, who then was named Jane Wells and now Jen Milo, and my soon-to-be husband, were like, oh, well, you should definitely use this little thing called WordPress. And I'm like, okay, fine. Uh, so started my blog in 2006. I've only ever blogged with WordPress, and never looked back, from a blogging and a CMS perspective. Certainly, it's changed a lot since that time. But yeah, I came to WordPress as a classic blogger. Um, and don't blog about wine as much anymore now that I have kids and various and sundry other things with my attention, but still really love wine a lot. I ended up with Automattic actually through my friend Jen Milo recruited me, um, and said, basically asked me, do you really love your job right now? And I was like, oh, no, no, I do not. Um, and she's like, oh, okay. I got this thing that you might be interested in. I'm like, I don't know. Seems shady, but sure. Okay, I'll try it. I didn't actually say seemed shady, but it seemed weird. But Jen was very influential in the WordPress space. Had project managed core for a long time. Was the leader of the last big change to the editor that we had in WordPress, the
Hmm.
Crazy Horse release. And she knew from her knowledge of me, and my background and our friendship, that she felt like I had all the tools needed to get in there and get the job done. And the stuff that I've done that have kind of related to the work I do now involves both. I was a canvasser for Greenpeace back in the day. That's actually where Jen and I met.
Wow.
So I knocked on people's doors in the 90s in Portland, keeping the dream alive and talking about the environment. And then I also worked as a teacher, obviously. I worked in marketing and construction. I worked in sales in beverage, in the beverage industry, and also did some HR and construction. So like, and this job is very much like teaching, some persuasion, definitely a lot of HR, a lot of like activism and working with volunteers and, you know, getting people excited to everyone move together in a space. I also was doing proposal management, so a lot of writing, and it just all kind of came together. And I've been doing this for a little over 6 years now.
Wow. You know, as you described that introduction, I was reflecting on how few people I've interviewed who talked about blogging being their gateway into this space. It's actually a little surprising, I think, when you think about it.
I think that
I don't know.
our bloggers don't participate as much in the community that a lot of people identify as the WordPress community right now. I think that what a lot of people consider the WordPress community, and the people that I work with are developers, are makers of WordPress, and help people make a WordPress for themselves, but aren't necessarily the target demographic when we're talking about designing WordPress, which is what makes this whole conversation about Gutenberg fascinating for me. But yeah, I'm one of the few, just a blogger.
Yeah, definitely. So now that we're a little bit caught up, let's talk a little bit about what it is that you actually do. For those who don't know, you're a community organizer. So what does that entail? And is it the same as it was when you started?
Kind of. When I first started this job back in 2011, we had we had the glimmerings of the founding of a project or a program around WordCamps. And I basically implemented the plan that Jen created and the program that she envisioned and created. But it sure as heck didn't look anything like it does today, as far as like, you know, the mission that this program had then and still does have is to make organizing WordCamps easier, and then also to make WordCamps better for attendees. So there's a dual mission, right? Help organizers and then make the events great for a great attendee experience.
Sure.
9 times out of 10, those things align, and sometimes, you know, when they don't, then we have to make some tough choices. And certainly the amount of support that we've been able to give organizers over the past 6 years has really improved. So that's been really exciting. And we've continued to identify ways to make the attendee experience better over time, which has also been really great. But I mean, the year that I started this job, we had 52 WordCamps. And this year, I'm thinking we might hit 135. So that's a big change.
That is incredible. As I recall, last year was the first year that we went over 100.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Last year we were right in that like 113, 115 range. So yeah, we've been experiencing huge growth, and all of that really is due to the Meetup program really taking off. And so now in my role as a community organizer, I help guide and support programs that support both people who are organizing monthly user groups, or meetups as we like to call them, and then also annual conferences, the two together. And because the Meetup program is just expanding, we're getting more, I think, more annual events, because that's what a WordCamp is just the celebration of the local community.
Right. Yeah, yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
And I think it would be cool to talk a little bit about your day to day, some of
Mhm.
the what you're responsible for, and where you focus your time and energy.
Sure. Well, uh, generally, I would say my work lately has gotten a lot more administrative as we've gotten a lot more trained, dedicated volunteers working in the program. I've gotten a little bit more program focused rather than uh, details focused necessarily. We have a huge team of amazing people who vet all of our applications and orient people and mentor word camps and meetup organizers and all that stuff. So I would say probably still 20 to 30% of my work is directly touching individual events and individual communities. Currently, I'm mentoring Omaha and Toronto. I am also mentoring Bogota. I speak Spanish quasi fluently, and I'm one of the two people on the team who does. So I end up doing some of our Spanish language work, at least in my set of time zones. And
Wow.
then I also, yeah, it's I credit to all of the people who speak Spanish as a first language who put up with all of my mistakes because there are tons of them. Um, yeah, and then I spend sometimes some weeks a lot of time and some weeks no time at all doing conflict resolution and mediation work. That's the kind of HR portion of the job, dealing with code of conduct issues and organizers that are having conflict in their community and need help working it out. That's one thing that the global community team does. That is something that doesn't get shined a lot of light on, but is really, really helpful for the community. Sometimes having a third party to come in and just say, okay, so let's all find out what we all agree on, and then we can figure
Mhm.
out the stuff that we don't agree on later. So a lot of that. And then also a lot of kind of logistics and operations stuff. So we are basically the AP and AR department for at least 100 events a year now. And so while I am not certainly, I have a payments day 1 day a week, but I also help with our annual audit. I am do a lot of kind of high level financial analysis of kind of where the program is looking and how we're doing. I also oversee the global sponsorship program, which is the program where large sponsors who want to give and to all of our programs globally rather than sponsoring a la carte, as it were, um, give money to our fiscal entity, and then we distribute that money out. And then also working with our volunteers, getting barriers out of their way, and then a little bit of product design too, like some of our new tools. I have been working on doing some tool design and helping guide people when they're making some decisions about new features that we want to add to the program. Both programs like the incubator program, for example, or also like literal tools like the sponsor invoice tool and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So.
I'm I would like to just look a little bit back on this time, the 6 years that you've been doing this. When you started implementing the plan, let's go back to there and compare that to now, and reflect on any of the things that maybe you didn't anticipate, maybe successes, that or growth that is far beyond what you planned or hoped for. Is there anything that really like succeeded that maybe you thought wouldn't work, or anything that grew far bigger than you ever believed it was? And how do you feel about that growth over that 6 year period?
Well, the growth is super exciting. It's also a huge challenge because I mean, the level, the level of of close partnership that we have in our program with our volunteer organizing teams is pretty high. Like, we are a high touch organization. And so, and I, in many ways, kind of set up that level of expectation of collaborating with every individual team, because when I came on, we had this kind of quasi new set of guidelines and expectations that people weren't accustomed to. And it was kind of my job to ask everyone to follow the same set of expectations. Possibly unsurprisingly, in a large open source project full of plucky iconoclasts and entrepreneurs, not a lot of our people like being asked to follow the same set of expectations all the time.
Wow.
So I know, shocking to all of us. And so those first couple of years were really all about like the objections that people had to everybody trying to organize more or less the same kind of event, right? So that when people go to a WordCamp, they more or less understand what to expect. It's a casual conference. It's locally organized. It reflects locals. It focuses on WordPress. It's not a one-person show. It's a group, that kind of thing. And then, but as we've grown, and and a lot of the struggle for the first couple of years was like people who were already accustomed to a certain lack of expectations, so setting their own expectations around WordCamp, being asked to follow somebody else's set of expectations, and that's hard, right? And some of them have stayed in the program, and some of them have left the program. And I can't say for sure, nobody definitely was asked to leave. But as we have more and more new people come into the program, the challenge has shifted from, oh, I have a distinctive way that I think this event should go, and I'm going to fight with you because it doesn't match the WordCamp expectations. It hasn't gone, we have very few of those conversations anymore. What we have more is conversations about like, okay, but how do I follow this expectation, or how do I meet this expectation, or why is that important to you, or to the program itself? And so it's less asking people to change their goals and more helping people reach the goals that they've agreed to shoot for when they come into the program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Similar kind of thought process, looking back on this time, is there anything that comes to mind that you're a little surprised didn't really work out, or maybe a little disappointed in, that maybe you thought, oh, we'll try this, and this is a for sure thing, this is going to work, or who's going to object to this, or how could this go wrong? Is there anything, when you look at the whole big WordCamp project, which has grown bigger than probably most people optimistically could have hoped for at the time, is there anything that really comes to mind, like you thought this would be better, or you thought this would be in place, but it's not?
I think the places where we're still figuring it out relate to taking the program and taking a unified set of expectations and applying it cross-culturally. So finding where cultural conflicts come into play with the cultural conflicts of the project itself. And so really taking a look at like where open source as a culture in and of itself runs into misunderstandings and failures when applied to a different set of values and expectations. To give an example, like there are certain cultures where self-promotion is really highly prized. where if you're not tooting your own horn, you are lost, and our project and open source in general does not seeks people to raise other, it has that rising tide lifts all boats idea, right? By selflessly working to support everyone, you also benefit. But our program is really down on self-promotion, just in general. Like, we open source people are highly, highly suspicious of someone who is in it to benefit only themselves, right? And so that conflict between our expectation that all of our community organizers be 100% altruistic and shine the light on others and not themselves gets really, really hard to implement in cultures where if you're not promoting yourself, you're a loser, and why are you even around? Like, it's so like asking people to go against what they've been raised to do is super duper hard. And it brings up all sorts of questions for me about like, well, can we even expect people to do this? And like, and then, how do we, are we asking people to be different to work in our program? Is that ethical? And then people who exhaustively follow the Make Community blog, hi, both of you, might have seen a little conversation that J-Trip, John James Jacoby and I had on a regional WordCamps post about like, find the right people and they'll do the right kind of work. And my crisis with that is like, you can't just find the right people. Like, that is exclusionary, right? And if we're going to include everyone, we basically need to define the right actions and ask them to do them. And that is complicated and nitpicky. And so, yeah, like that kind of stuff, I'm like, if it should, one or the other should work all the time, and neither one works all the time. So it's a problem in my mind. Wow. I don't know if that's cogent or not, but.
No, that's a fascinating problem to be experiencing, and
tough one.
That's a head scratcher.
Up at night. I really, honestly, I think about this stuff a lot. But
it hadn't crossed my mind before, the thought of that. That was beyond the purviews of my personal experiences, right, to encounter like complete cultures. I've encountered. Certainly people with that mentality who, in this open source environment would be, have the wrong, not quite aligned values, I guess, with that. I've encountered them, certainly. But the thought of there being entire cultures that you could be operating within which have that viewpoint, that certainly is challenging. And it is difficult to take a stance that one is more appropriate or better
than the other, right? Superior. Exactly. That's very that's a bold statement, right?
It certainly is.
The closest I've come to it is just saying, listen, this is the culture of our open source project, so these are our values. It's not, obviously it is strongly based in Western culture because that's where open source culture arose from. But I'm certainly not saying that you can't find altruistic people in cultures that don't generally reward altruism, but it is certainly an impediment to growth in certain communities.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good one. I wonder, like, there's a number of questions that I'm curious about, and to a certain extent, they're questions that I'm mostly just personally curious about because these have been the experiences that I've had. I'm no stranger to a WordCamp. I've been to a lot of them, organized my fair share as well, and have been involved in a lot of conversations relating to WordCamp and how WordCamps have changed over the years, and the increasing number of rules that get introduced each year for the betterment of the program, of course. So there's a lot of them that I find a little bit interesting. It strikes me that there's often been an impression, and a lot of my information is just impressions
Sure.
from lots of other organizers
That's what
sharing.
perception is. It's
Yeah,
a lot of people talking,
yeah,
and then people make assumptions or decisions based on the data that they have available.
yeah.
That's just being a human being.
Sure. So we see as the years go by, the rule book gets bigger. Basically, that we seem to get more defined, and when in areas where it was loosely defined, it gets more concretely defined as years go by, as one would logically. And I am sure that the rule book was a lot slimmer and simpler 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
For you encountered all kinds of people doing all kinds of things with the WordCamp program, and I'm sure pushing the boundaries in areas that maybe you didn't anticipate. Um, Talk a little bit about some of the bigger changes that you've made in that 6-year period. Some of the big things. When something came up and you had to lay down the law and say, going forward, this is a hard rule. Here's why. Some people won't like it. And what were a few of those big changes that came to mind? Maybe they were contentious or not, but maybe they had a big impact on the future of the program.
You know, I hate to say it, but in many ways, I don't feel like our rule book has changed that much over the time. I think what people perceive as kind of as new expectations or new rules are actually someone writing down, frequently me, the application of a certain value that was constant for a certain case. So like, I mean, certainly a value that we hold very closely is openness and basically flat organization, right? So making it really, really possible for anyone who comes into the program who's a trusted member of the community can take on a leadership role. And that in its application, as we've kind of encountered ways that people keep other people from being able to take leadership, has kind of gotten more elaborate and better defined. The way you put it was quite apt, because our documentation hasn't actually changed that much. We still use almost literally everything that was on plan.wordcamp.org in 2011 is nearly verbatim still in the handbook. Like that's still the bones of the handbook dating back to 2011. There are a few new things that came up to address overarching questions like openness, for example. That one that comes to mind immediately was back in 2014, in the community summit there. I was really surprised, but a lot of our community organizers felt that the best way to deal with entrenched leadership in the community, like someone taking a leadership position and then never letting it go, or never being able to let it go even, was to try out a 2-year term limit for WordCamp organizers, right? So, and the way that works is one lead organizer can only be lead organizer for 2 years in a row before the community has to take a break and have another lead organizer have that titular position. The organizer can still be on the team. That organizer can still come back a year after and have 2 more years in a row if she needs to or whatever, but we enforce a break. And that is, I was super scared about that. I was like, oh my gosh, everyone's gonna hate it so much. I was like, all right, you guys everybody needs to help defend this position. I think it might work, but I don't know. And not everybody loves it. And we have to explain it sometimes. But all in all, it has turned out, I think, to have a number of unanticipated benefits that I really didn't identify back in the day. And lo and behold, very few communities have collapsed under the requirement to switch up the leadership role every 2 years. And in fact, I think it's done a lot of good as far as like setting expectations really early even for leaders, saying, hey, listen, this isn't the Andrea show here, right? Like somebody else is going to have to take leadership in 2 years here, even though I'm getting it started. So y'all need to learn how to lead this thing too, and make it more of a shared role. And I think that enforced turnover has been a huge, huge benefit in the program. I didn't realize at the time how much it would help. So that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I may have kept talking longer than I should have and may have forgotten your original question. So if you have a follow-up, please let me know.
I have too many questions for us to go back and rehash old ones.
Okay. Keep going.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not too surprised that particular one came up, because that was significant, and that comes up all the time in discussions with other organizers. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed a surprising amount of misinformation and misunderstanding of the rule, kind of disappointing amount of that, with a lot of organizers getting the specifics of the rule incorrect, or a lot of hearsay, or I think it's something like this, or this many years, or with this exception, or that, or yada yada. But that's probably an example.
We have a huge PR problem. Like the global community team in general is terrible at communicating within our own program about all of our stuff. Like we still haven't figured that out. So yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, and it relates to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, about the idea of maybe the rule book growing, or things getting a little more well-defined over time. It struck me that there's a lot of second, third, fourth hand information being passed around. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I see a lot of what I believe are really guidelines being understood as hard rules, mm-hmm. or being, for one, often being misunderstood to begin with, and remembered incorrectly. But two, what I often perceive to be like recommendations and preferences, mm-hmm. like these are what we believe work best in most situations, being interpreted as a rule. And someone says, well, I can't organize a word camp because I've heard that you have to have this or that. Mm-hmm. So definitely those communication issues seem to be significant and very challenging to overcome. Yes. When operating like at this scale with a global community.
Really hard. Really, thank you. Good. Yeah. We match. I like it. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's compounded by the fact that, listen, we're an open source community. Nobody comes to open source because they like to deal with the man, right? Like we're not a proprietary software community. We are a community full of people who love freedom, they love independence, and they are kind of naturally attracted to writing their own code book, rule book, plan, business, all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, again, just being human, it's a very comfortable paradigm to be in, to be like, I'm a lone wolf out here fighting for freedom against people telling me what to do. And so, I mean, if that narrative is attractive to you, then you'll fall into that very easily. And so, unfortunately, brains are hard to code. They overwrite your your patches basically nightly. And so, I mean, a lot of the work that people on the global community team does is that work of saying, hey, listen, we're here to help, and nobody wants to fight. So if there's anything we can clarify, we'd love to. And, our mentor program is certainly one of the ways that we try to get the information out there and have a friendly connection, one-on-one with every organizer. But yeah, it's frustrating to hear poorly understood impressions of the program. But I don't know, if that were going to break me, I would have broken a long time ago. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, there's no doubt that you're in a challenging position, one that most days I don't envy. It sounds pretty difficult. One of the things that really strikes me as challenging, and in a number of ways, maybe just emotionally mostly, but you have to toe a fine line of being the one who's responsible for sometimes enforcing rules, and also the one responsible for being the helper. And if I have had plenty of experiences talking with other organizers who where one person, when the topic of WordCamp Central comes up, is excited and happy because they are there to help and empower you and make it possible for me to organize an event that I could never do on my own. And it's just amazing. Whereas on the other hand, another organizer perceives Central as the authority who's there to slap you on the wrist and tell you what you can't do. Mm-hmm. There's these difficult, kind of opposite perceptions, which everyone falls on one side to some degree, and you have to deal with both of them. How do you personally just cope with that, and also professionally, how do you best balance those two responsibilities?
Well, you would be shocked and amazed at how much time all of us on the global community team put into writing the perfect email. I mean, we're like pair programming. We're like, all right, no, different word. No, change that sentence. Break it up. Also, you don't need to say that. And this. And I mean, it was a while ago that I finally recognized, okay, so this is actually writing code, except it's just verbal communication, or it's just it's text communication. So that's fine. So we're just going to collaborate. We're going to pair up. We're going to have code reviews of our communication, and people are going to just workshop stuff. It's ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous because it's you can't control what people experience from interacting with you, right? Mm-hmm. That's another reason, P.S., why that article about Ursula K. Le Guin's thoughts on communication is so interesting to me, because that interaction, that one-on-one interaction, is so powerful and seems to be much richer and more powerful than emailing back and forth with people. But I mean, I don't know. It's very strange to me still, after 6 years, to find out that people are scared of me, because I experience myself as a real pussycat. I'm someone who hates conflict, really struggles, has lots of moral quandaries, wakes up at 2 a.m. worrying about whether a decision is right or not, worrying about what decision is the right one to make. Just exhaustive thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking about things. And again, on that global spectrum is, it's something I put a lot of heart and soul into and a lot of care into. And so it's really weird to me when people are like, oh yeah, so-and-so is terrified of you. I'm like, Why? Why? Why do I feel like I'm a very friendly person. But I do realize, I mean, the whole backbone of our program is that communicating on the internet takes your humanity away. And gosh darn it, if it didn't happen to me too, like people can inflect whatever I say and whatever you say and whatever anybody says with whatever motivations or secret agenda or Aunt Susie, who is mean, you know, I mean, whatever like association they bring to the communication is completely out of our control. And so, you know, and that's why I think the project gives so many resources to our live in-person events, because I really, really believe that WordCamps and meetups are the white blood cells of the WordPress project. I mean, we are the ones who create the immunity to the kind of conflict that could tear us all apart, right? And so when I can, I try to like get on a video call with someone and be non-threatening, and get to events. It's difficult for me to get to events because I have 2 young children and travel is hard on my family, but I get out to them when I can. And then just working really hard to be clear and to be kind and to write the kindest and most compassionate rejection and criticism letters that anyone could ever write. and really honestly, like, give probably too much leeway. You know, I mean, there are a lot of other volunteer organized events and volunteer programs out there where it's basically, if you want to do the work we want you to do, then you can do it. If not, see ya. But because our project and our program is all about inclusion and openness and collaboration and consent, we really workshop and we really work hard to find collaborative solutions that work for as many people as possible.
Yeah. You mentioned that there are other events out there, and just out of curiosity, you've had a lot of experience prior to working here, and you've been involved in this open source thing for a long time now, relatively speaking. Is there anywhere else outside of the WordPress space that you look and you just watch with a curious eye, or anything you take inspiration from, or anything you think draws a good parallel to what you're really trying to accomplish? Or are you really feeling a lot of times like you're in uncharted territory?
I think the WordPress community our set of programs around WordPress community are, I wish I didn't think this, but I think we're unique within open source. I am always on the search. If you are listening to this and you think, oh, I know exactly a program that is exactly like the WordCamp or the Global Community Team program, they're crazy for thinking they're special. Please tell me who they are, because I want to copy everything about them. There are so many things we can't figure out how to fix, and I really want to fix them. And I want to fix them by doing what that person did. So I always keep an eye on what Mozilla is doing, because they have such a large program and do a lot of interesting stuff. I am interested in spending some more time with the Google Developer Group people to see what I can steal from them. Wikimedia Foundation is very interesting to me. They are, they again are a large kind of globally focused collaborative set of programs. And then in the for-profit sector, I'm quite interested in how Startup Weekend works. Their program seems somewhat analogous to ours, and so I'm kind of interested to see like what we can steal. And also I've been really interestedly following Creative Mornings. The parallels aren't very close because they mostly just have like, they're a lot more hands-off on some things and then a lot more hands-on on other things. But they basically have a global meetup program that I certainly envy their collateral. Let's put it that way. Our documents are very ugly compared to everything they do. But yeah, so those are the people that are kind of under my eye right now. And like I said, I would love to get more recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah. Earlier we were discussing a few things, and you mentioned that one thing that was on your mind a lot lately is working with community organizers and trying to create the space for participation, making it possible for people to get involved, and just ironing that out. You mentioned news about Google recently, kind of inspiring you. So I was hoping you could kind of elaborate a little bit on that, and just what you're trying to shoot for here and improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot. I mean, I do always think a lot about how about the work that community organizers do in the project, right? It's a position that is sneakily powerful. And so for that reason, I think it's actually probably a good thing that we have a fair number of set expectations around it, because what a community organizer does in his or her local community is they create a space, hopefully, for collaboration and participation, right? And because human brains are buggy and it's hard to make everyone face and go in the same direction all the time, creating that space is really challenging. And the reason that the whole Google memo and diversity and inclusion part came up for me was the perspective of, well, how do you make, what are the things that break your open, participatory, collaborative space that you are organizing as a community organizer? What are the things that shut people down and chase them out? And I mean, I think that the Google memo is a great example of something that shuts people down and chases them out. So then how do you deal with that? And especially in a community like ours that really values so deeply personal expression, right? Balancing the value of personal expression with the possible damage that certain expressions can cause for a long time, for a lot of people that you don't even know about, because they just pack up and go, right? Because they've just been given the message like, oh, okay, I get it. This is not a space where I am welcome. That's cool. I'm out of here. And so, it's a super, super complicated job for volunteers to do in their spare time, when they frequently just feel like social secretaries for people, and servants, making sure that people know how to find the space, and listening to complaints about parking and content and stuff like that. I mean, the work is so challenging to make that space, and to really think about okay, so if we have it at a bar, we have our monthly meetup at a bar, what does that tell the people who are coming? What are their set of expectations? What do they think about, oh, I'm in a bar, so this is the appropriate behavior for bars? You're subconsciously, what's going on in their heads? What are people thinking from the perspective of, oh, every time I go into a bar, people are jerks to me, or this bar isn't for me, or maybe I'm under 21 and I can't even go into a bar, just venue selections alone, right? Which again is the reason that the don't have it in a religiously affiliated venue is a huge thing, even though it's really hard to implement that. But so venue selection is super hard, content selection is super complicated, because you're putting a presenter up there if you do that kind of thing. And how do they take questions? Does the way that they interact with the general group match what your group, the feel that you want your group to have? How do you call for participation? Do you call for participation come on, guys, it's super hard to organize this every month, and I really wish we'd get some help for a change. We all have jobs. Or are you saying, hey, you know, even if you've never done this before, I had never done this before too. So I can help you and you can do it. And we, over and over and over again, we want to welcome more participation. This is a space for you. Please feel free to stand up and we have a leadership position open for you. You know, like those are two ways to make a call for volunteers that will probably have a very different response, you know? And so, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about like, how do we help our organizers who are volunteers who are generally not experienced in community organizing, like thread that needle of welcoming participation, but also really defining clearly like what kind of interaction we're looking for and what kind of community you're making.
Mm-hmm. Our time is a little bit winding down here, and that's a great topic, which I kind of wish we could discuss at greater length, but I failed to bring it up until now, so my bad.
We'll have to do this again sometime.
That'd be great. I'm up for talking anytime, even offline, because just my questions. But a few more before we conclude here, and we'll try and be a little more rapid.
Okay.
Have you ever had a favorite WordCamp?
No. All my WordCamps are my favorite.
Oh, gee. Well, maybe it's because you haven't been to Ann Arbor yet, but is there somewhere that, yeah, gosh darn it, I can't believe there's not a WordCamp there yet, and I wish there was.
Indianapolis.
All right. Yeah, I agree. That would be great.
Right?
Even
Boise.
though,
Also Boise. Both of us.
Yeah, that too. I am located in the Midwest in Michigan, and I do feel like I'm very blessed with the high density of WordCamps that we have here.
There haven't been any in Indiana.
Not in the whole state of Indiana. That's just
the entire state of Indiana is
egg.
empty. I used to. I went to high school in Dayton. I was a teenage Midwesterner, and I lived in Indiana for a little bit. But yeah, it drives me crazy that there isn't anything in Indiana yet. What the heck?
Got it. Yeah. Well, someday. Yeah. What are some things you like to do? You know, when you're not working?
I really love cooking and baking and stuff like that. I recently introduced my 8-year-old to the Great British Baking Show. She is obsessed. I love it. I started up piano lessons. I took a sabbatical earlier this year and started learning piano. So I'm almost to unit 10 of the Faber introduction. So I'm enjoying that. Meditation. My family really loves to camp. And with kids, it's complicated, but we get it done. And yeah, I bought a house about 3 years ago with this like crazy intense garden because like it was owned by a master gardener and she had it for like 50 years. And so like I'm learning how to kill things and how not to kill things. But I found myself enjoying working in the yard a lot, and it's a good stress reliever. And I read voraciously. I am a huge fan of science fiction and fantasy books. I've been reading sci-fi since I was like 10. And so yeah, that's another one of my.
Have you read anything recently that was really good? Maybe that stands out. Oh, that's got to be recommended to more people.
I really like a series of books. I'm gonna get it wrong. By actually someone who writes games, multiplayer games on the old internets. His name is Patrick Weekes, Weekes, and the one that I have up most recently is the Paladin Caper. It's like a combination of like a fantasy series with, but it's all like a con. Like every book is a long con. So if you like The Sting and stuff like that, you would really be into it. And then the lead character is this super powerful, super smart woman of color, which I love. So yeah, I would definitely check out the Patrick Weekes series, The Rogue something or other. I can't remember the name of the series.
That's enough, I think, for anybody who's used the internet before to figure it out.
Yes, that's right.
So you're located in Portland. You're involved a little bit when it comes to events in our space. Is there anything on your calendar where somebody might bump into you in coming months?
In Portland.
Or anywhere, for that matter.
I don't get out much. I will be in Toronto for WordCamp Toronto at the end of September. I will also be in another WordCamp, and I don't think they've announced me. Maybe that's a secret. I maybe ought to keep it a secret. I will say, I will talk. I just realized I was like, oh, I was gonna, and then I haven't. I don't think they've announced me yet. But I'm keynoting that event. It's in the Pacific Northwest, but it's not WordCamp Portland. So do the math. But yeah, and then I'll definitely be at WordCamp US. So I've got some travel coming up in the fall. And yeah, as far as 2018, I'm not sure what yet, but.
Do you make it a point to visit non-WordCamp events now and then?
I do. I set myself the goal of going to at least 2 per year, again, for stealsies. I want to know what other people are doing that we can bring into the program. This year, because of my sabbatical, I wasn't able to get out to non-WordCamp events, just because I was not working for 3 months. And then all of the WordCamps that I needed to go to kind of came together. But next year, I hope to go to at least one kind of community manager, community organizer focused conference. And then I would like to go to a nonprofit focused conference as well, to see kind of like where nonprofit tech kind of related conference, and see if those people have ideas I can take as well. So,
or maybe ideas that you could share.
Also, yeah, I am always happy to talk about our successes in the program, but I really worry that there are some great ideas out there that none of us are thinking about. So when people ask, I'm happy to, as you have noticed, talk interminably about our program. But when I go out to other events, mostly I want to find out what we're missing that we need.
I think that is important. I somehow feel compelled to say, after our discussion about all the challenges that you face and the growing pains, just all these difficulties, and that this is very much a work in progress, that it has been a huge success. And a lot of credit is due to you and the rest of the team and the community team for just accomplishing something amazing, for doing such a great job at keeping this culture alive and vibrant and protected in all cases. And anyway, I think just a lot of credit really is due to you and the team, and that this has definitely been a huge success. And if there are other people out there trying things like this, it would probably be very wise of them to get some insight from you and to look at the WordCamp program, which has done really objectively quite well, I think.
I'm really proud of what everyone associated with our program has achieved, and we keep striving together, which makes me really, really happy. Because if we just keep talking and keep working on it, we can really do anything. I mean, I honestly believe that like anything is possible if we're just willing to keep coming together and finding our commonality and keep talking. It's really like we can accomplish anything if we stay together.
Well said. Just a couple more real quick. Is there somebody or anyone really who comes to mind that you think you should ask them to be on your show in the future?
Well, I think Jenny Wong would be great.
Oh yeah,
I haven't already talked to Jenny. Francesca Morano also is amazing. Hugh Lashbrook is doing some super cool stuff, implementing our deputy program and helping our deputy program get organized. So also on the global community team. I think that talking to more organizers from outside the US would be great. So there are, you know, lots of people who are doing cool stuff in Mexico, and a lot of people doing amazing stuff in kind of Oceania. Talking to people in Australia would be super interesting. D. Teal is amazing and super smart. So definitely check out D. I will hook you up if you need to if you need an intro. But yeah, I think the more that all of our community knows more about how the challenges outside of the US and Western Europe, I think the more we all benefit.
That sounds important. And thank you. Those are some good recommendations. As we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share, as well as how someone might get in touch with you if they were so inclined?
I encourage everyone to subscribe to make.wordpress.org/community, which is the blog where all of the global community team collaborates and talks. Of course, we're also in WordPress.org Slack under hashtag community-events, and also community team is the other channel. I'm on Twitter at Andrea Middleton and A&D Middleton, although I'm not a very active Twitter person. If people reach out to me, I will find you. Yeah, those are kind of the main places to find me out on the interwebs. But yeah, there's definitely room for you if you have not already participated on the global community team, either as a local organizer or as someone who wants to help us take a look at new programs and ways we can refine our older programs. We are always looking for more participation.
I'm glad you mentioned the Make blog for the community, which I should have mentioned already, but that's a great resource, and I subscribe to a lot of the Make blogs, and the community one is always one of the more interesting. In fact, had we more time, that was one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more about, because as I follow all of these Make blogs, I observe that there are so many posts which, well, some do engage people and do spark discussion, and the community posts in particular seem very good for that. There's all kinds of TV and documentation and meta, and it's crickets when a lot of posts go. But when there are a lot of topics which you are very actively involved in leading, which we get no shortage of comments and a lot of people voicing strong opinions. I think it's an interesting position that you find yourself in.
We have an unusual use case in that we have all of our community are people who really like to communicate and collaborate. So like you don't end up as a community organizer if you hate communicating with people generally. And so like, and also our P2 used to be dead in the water. Like nobody ever posted there. If you subscribed to it 3 years ago, you would never recognize it compared to now. So a lot of it is just engagement.
Wow, that's interesting. 3 years ago. That's about the time we started using Slack. Has that been really great for engaging the community?
Nope. I mean, yes, but I would not correlate those two. I think it was I know that it was an active, intentional approach to do all of the talking and ask for lots and lots and lots of input as the program was growing already on the blog. And so we made a super, super strong effort to get out of back channels, to get out of private DMs, talk about every single thing we could possibly talk about in public. And this is the fruit of that, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's been amazing. You guys have done a great job. And I don't want to take any more of your time, Andrea. I'm really appreciative. You just like out of the middle of your workday, you come and join us, answer all of my goofy questions, a fraction of the ones that I had. But thank you very much. And I'm going to let you carry on with your workday.
All right. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Andrea.